first thing that we're going to go over is we're going to go over why does the eye kind of look the way that it does, and some of the things that we need to keep in mind, like behind the eye. Okay, so it is okay when you're drawing an eye just to go straight into like, okay, it kind of goes up and down and, you know, around like that. But it's still, again, important to understand why you're making those decisions. So here I have my eye. I'm just going to lower the opacity a little bit so that way you can see what I'm doing on top of it. First thing that's always good to remember is that this is an eyeball. Okay? It doesn't stop just because you can't see it. So it's important to note that when we are drawing eyes, that we are drawing the entire eyeball sitting in the eye socket, okay? And what this is really helpful to understand is when it comes to the shading of the eye. So we have, you know, knowledge of the eyeball is sitting behind there. So if I go into the actual picture, you will notice that around this area, right up here, that it gets lighter, okay? And then it gets darker kind of around here where the eyelid is. And the reason that it kind of gets lighter here, whoopsies, the reason that it kind of gets lighter around this area and then it gets darker around this area is because when I'm working with my eye, there it is. It gets lighter because the eyeball is pushing on the skin, the eyelids, parts like that. Now, up here though, it gets darker because my eyeball is sitting in the eye socket, okay? Your eyeball doesn't fill in your eye socket completely, okay? So you have the eye socket in which your eyeball is sitting on. And that's what tells us where do I put my shading, okay? Where do I include the shadows? Where do I include the highlights? Things like that, okay? And that's why after this part right here, where it gets darker, it's gonna then get lighter right underneath the eyebrow. And that's because that's the brow bone. So we've gone from protruding out with the eye to going in because of the eye socket and then protruding out again because of the brow bone, okay? The other thing that we have to keep in mind is the iris and the pupil are just like the eyeball. They're full circles. So whenever we're adding in the iris into our eye to make it more natural, you always want to make sure that you're acknowledging that it goes through a part that we can't see, okay? And this is also really helpful if you're trying to portray more emotions, okay? More of the iris that we see, the more like surprised someone is. So let's begin drawing an eye. So I am going to keep in mind that I have my eyeball, and we'll include the iris in a little bit later, okay, once we decide where we want to position it to show the person looking. Now, the eye shape is kind of weird, but it kind of mimics itself, okay? What I mean is like kind of what we do to the top, we're going to do similarly to the bottom, okay? So the basic eye shape, we're actually not going to start on the eyeball. We're going to start a little bit out here because we have to include this part right here. And what this is, this guy right around here, that's the tear duct. So we're going to include that part. So we have to make sure, I just drew that on my picture. There we go. We have to make sure that we are having our eye start a little bit on the outside. So we're going to have that be a little bit rounded. And now we can actually start on the shape of the eye. So the shape of the eye goes up, and then it slightly slants back down, okay? The bottom part, so you can see it goes up and then slides down. The bottom part does kind of the same thing, it's just kind of flipped. So the bottom part goes slightly out, and then it comes back in. And then those two parts come to a point, okay? Make sure I use the outside of my eyeball. There we go. And that does go to the edge of the eyeball, okay? There shouldn't be too much of like anything poking out or anything over here. So now we have these basic shapes. I'm then let me zoom in here, going to make sure that I define this edge of the eyeball, okay? Because that is literally the edge that we see, okay? I'm then going to lighten up this part. Hopefully you can't hear my brother talking on the phone very loudly. There we go. That way we can still remember that there is an eyeball there to help us with the shading afterwards. We're now going to include the iris, okay? Now, a lot of times what I see my students do is you have someone put like the whole iris into the eye, okay? This automatically makes it look like the eye is like really wide open, okay? What you want to try and make sure that you do is at least have one part somewhat skewed by the eyelids, okay? So since I'm recreating this, I'm going to draw the whole iris so you can see it, but I'm going to have the iris start up here, come down, so my person is slightly looking up, okay? I'm going to erase this part we can't see, so that way you just have it a little bit. Now smack dab in the middle is the pupil. And another thing that I see people often do is they draw like really, really small pupils. But a thing to remember about the pupil is that it reacts to stimulus from the sun and light. So if there's a lot of light, it's going to be smaller. And if there's not a lot of light, it's going to be bigger. And this is because the wider our pupils are, the more sunlight it can let in. So they become really, really small when there's a ton of light because they don't want to damage the eyes. So I'm just going to do just a normal medium pupil right in the center of my iris. There we go. So my person, once again, is looking kind of upward. Next up, I'm going to go in and draw just some of these other lines because they will help me with placing things like the eyelashes, the shading. That is simply going to be this bottom eyelid and the top eyelid. Now one thing I'm going to add to the top eyelid as well, while the bottom eyelid I'm just going to leave it to one line. The top eyelid I'm going to have it droop down a little bit, and then I'm going to add a second line like that. And that's because there's a lot more skin on the top eyelid. That's why you're able to close your eyes. So when this eyelid is open, it's going to have more creases because you're pushing back more skin. At this point, we want to go into our tear duct and add a couple of the details. Generally speaking, for the details in the tear duct, I normally just include kind of 3 lines just to give it a little bit of definition. So I'm going to go in and add that part of the tear duct. There's a curve on the bottom, and then this point on the side. I think at this point we are good to start adding detail to our eye, okay? The first part that we are going to shade, and by the way, we are shading it before we start doing the eyelashes, just because once you add those eyelashes, it's really difficult to go in between each and every one of these and change any shading that you've done. So since the eyelashes are our darkest part, that is going to be the last thing that we do, okay? So the first thing I'm going to shade is I'm actually going to shade the eyeball itself. Now remember that our eyes are just circles and they're 3-dimensional, so that means that they're spheres. So when I go to shade an eye, I need to remember that it casts certain shadows certain ways. So because it does have this eyelid on top that's casting a shadow on it, instead of having, normally in our class we did like our light source up here, so that way there was like the highlight and the shadow down there. Well, our source of light is more like kind of there. Mostly because, again, this eyelid is casting a shadow down on the eye. So our shadows, furthest away, They're going to be like that. Okay? So if I go back to my eye, I'm going to lightly shade right across the top here. Maybe get just a little bit darker right where it hits the eyelid. Okay? Just going to add a little bit of lighter just throughout the whole thing. Just going to add a little bit of light gray to everywhere. That way when I go to add the highlights to make it look like the eye is wet, I have something to add the white to. Okay? So my eyeball is shaded. Okay? Next up, we have this fun part. Okay? The iris. There are a couple ways to draw the iris, but I'm going to show you a way that's kind of easy, but you get a really great result, okay? Because this part that I did right here, there's actually a really, really easy way to do it. So, and it's kind of basically the way that she shows in the video. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to get a small brush here, and I'm going to make these kind of like squiggly mountain ranges, okay? And now the rest of my iris goes behind my eye, so I'm not going to continue it, okay? And I'm also going to put a second layer. I'm going to go in with my eraser afterwards, so it doesn't need to look perfect. There we go. What I'm going to do is in part 1, which is this inside part, I'm going to have it go from the pupil to this first line, okay, like that. And what I need to make sure is that I'm still keeping a good amount of spacing in between, and I also have to make sure that I'm going around with the pupil, okay? And I need to make sure that I'm using nice straight lines, okay? We don't want curved lines, we don't want them to all start going the same way. We want to make sure that they're going around the pupil. So I'm going to start drawing these lines. And you'll notice I am pushing down on my pen, or pencil I guess. Sometimes I push harder, sometimes I push lighter, but it's going around the pupil. It's radiating out of there, okay, like sunbeams. So I have those ones, okay? I'm then going to do the same thing along the outside, where I'm going to start from the outermost one, and I'm going to move out to the rest of the iris. So I'm going to start. Going around. And what's nice is we now have the first layer to help let me know what my line should be looking like, what direction, okay? So now we have this kind of weird stuff going on. Before I go in and add more details, I'm going to get a little bit of my eraser. And I'm just going to kind of go around where I drew that squiggle to kind of soften those lines that I drew as my guide. Okay? There we go. I am then going to shade the outside of the iris. Okay? So the part I'm talking about is this part right around here. Okay? So I'm going to take my shading. For you it'll be your pencil, of course. And I'm just going to darken along the inside of the iris here. I'm also going to darken along the top here for where the eyelid is hitting my eye. Okay? I'll clean up some of this. There we go. So our eye is getting a little bit more detail. Okay? If you want to show like more lines, things like that, that's totally fine. Sometimes adding like slightly bigger ones here and there, give it a little bit more depth. But you don't have to. It gives kind of the same look. Okay? Sometimes I also like to go in with a small eraser and along this outside just do a couple lines. That way they go a little bit into that shading I did. Just to give it a little bit more texture, I guess you would say. To make our eye really pop, it's all about the highlighting on it. So I'm going to go in with my eraser. I'm just going to do this kind of shape. This is kind of just a generic glare on the eyeball shape. I'm also going to include, let's see, a little bit highlight over here, and I'm going to include just a dot right there in the pupil. Okay. To continue making the eye look wet, okay, that's why it's so reflective, is because our eyes aren't dry, so they're very glossy, they reflect a lot. I'm going to go in with my eraser and very lightly kind of do this like broken line, okay? So you can see I didn't do a straight line. It's got some like bumps and squiggles to it, because that'll make it look a little bit more natural, okay? We can still see the eyeball, we can still see the eye. We're good to move on to more of the shading and more of the details. Just really nice and quickly, I'm going to go in here and shade in the tear duct. Now, because it's just made up of tiny spheres, just like our eye, I'm just going to, whoopsies, I'm just going to very easily, let me define them so you can see them better. There you go. I'm just going to go in and shade them like a sphere, where I shade them on one part, but I don't shade them on another part. So now that I have that shaded, just like the eye, since they are wet, I'm again going to go in with my eraser and doing that kind of broken squiggly line. I'm going to add some highlights to it, okay? We're not quite done with the inside of the eye, but we will add the finishing touches once we have done the eyelashes, okay? But before we do that, we are going to move to the shading of the whole eye, okay? To just make it a little bit easier to tell what I'm doing, I am going to add a very light gray to just everything around the eye to represent skin. That way you can see where I'm adding shadows and highlights. So I'm going to start off with what I already know. That's nice and easy. I know that right where this fold, where the eyelids are, it gets darker. So I'm going to go in, darken that a little bit for where the creases are, darken that a little bit, and then I'm going to go in and highlight right at the top of this front part of the eyelid and along the bottom here. I'm also going to add a little bit of shading right a little bit of the outside of the tear duct, okay? That's because right here, between where the tear duct is, it kind of pushes some of the skin out like that. So the shading isn't going to touch the tear duct. It's going to be a little bit further out, and then I'm actually going to go in and right along the tear duct, I'm going to add a little bit of a highlight there. So that way it makes it look like it's 3D, okay? So you can see some of that highlighting. There's also a little piece right down here, and that's actually the eye like starting to interact with our cheekbones and our noses that are coming out, but we won't worry about that right now. Right now we just want to focus on the eye and the eye only, okay? To do the rest of the shading that goes with my eye, I'm going to have to include my eyebrow. So to start off nice and easy, I'm just going to go whoosh, and that'll be my basic shape of my eyebrow. Eyebrows are nice and easy. They start off bigger in the front, and then they taper down into a point just like that, okay? So that is my eyebrow. And knowing that that's where my eyebrow is, I now know that it does get darker right here because of the eye socket, but then once it hits my brow bone, it's going to start to get lighter like that. okay? And this highlight kind of comes a little bit further down. Here we go. So we have the eye socket, the eyelid, and the brow bone all interacting with each other. So that's kind of how you shade like around the eye and things like that, okay? There's not too much shading and highlighting on the bottom eyelid apart from this, because right over here is actually our cheek. So it just gets lighter over there, okay? So you don't really have to worry about anything more until you're drawing, you know, the rest of the human face. So let's move on to the hairy parts, okay? Let's move on to the eyelashes and the eyebrows. I'm going to do the eyebrows first just because I find them nice and easy and fast to do. When it comes to the eyebrows, you just want to make sure that you're following the correct curve and direction of the eyebrow, okay? So the hair on the eyebrow, it doesn't just go up like that. It doesn't go straight across like this. It kind of does both, okay? And what I mean by that is it doesn't go straight up or straight over, it curves, okay? I'm doing these ones kind of big. They're going to have really nice bushy eyebrows, that way you can really see the direction in which I'm doing the hair, okay? So I'm going to keep curling it over, and as I start getting further and further down, I'm going to stop going like this, and it's going to slowly start stretching out a little more, okay? Still following that curve of the eyebrow. So here I am kind of straightening it out. You want to make sure that you hit the bottom of that line that you made. This is easier to do with pencil. And also when you're not, you know, going fast to show people how to do it. But you should be able to still see the, you know, the hair follicles, things like that. And it should have like an obvious texture. To give it some more texture, I'm going to go in with my eraser and just lightly go over, like right in the center there. Go back in with my pencil and just add a couple more on either side. Okay, I'm not going to go into that center where I just erased it. I'm then going to go in with my eraser one more time, nice and small. Oopsies, a little too pushing down hard. Push down nice and softly. There you go. And then you can just add a couple of highlights. Nice, big, well, it's not actually big, kind of made it small. Let's make it the correct size. There we go. There's an eyebrow. There we go. Our eye has its eyebrow. Similar to the eyebrow, we're going to be doing the eyelashes now. So for the eyelashes, I'm going to make sure that I'm using the tip of my pencil. Okay, I'm going to be using a very small point. And the important thing to remember about the eyelashes is just like the eyebrow, they curl. Okay? So I need to make sure that I'm following the shape of the eye. Okay? Eyelashes don't all just go like whoosh outwards, things like that. They curl with the curve of the eye. So for these top ones, I'm going to have them coming out of this top line that I have of the eyeball, okay? Because they actually start like around over here, but because of the way they curve, they look like they're coming like right out of your eye. They're not, that'd be gross, but they kind of look like it. So starting over on this side, okay, this left-hand side over here, I'm going to start with like really curved, going this direction, okay, going that direction, eyelashes. And I'm going to have some of them overlap, so I want some of my eyelashes to just go like that, and then I want some to overlap like this, okay? I'm just going to slowly go around. Now that I'm getting towards the center of my eyeball, I'm going to kind of vary what direction they go. So some are going to go more, you know, kind of straight, and then they're slowly going to start going the other direction. So they're getting a little bit more straight, still overlapping a little. And now I'm getting to where your eyelashes are thickest, which is over this direction. Make sure that you're keeping them curved and overlapping each other. Now, how many eyelashes you do is kind of up to you. I'm sticking them like kind of far apart from each other, not too many, because I want you to see my brush strokes. But you can see, you know, by adding more, you can make them thicker, things like that, okay? But you want to make sure that you can see some of them kind of come down and curve, okay? So you should have some kind of like bumps right here on the eye, okay? The bottom eyelashes are basically the same thing. We're just going to do less of them. And we're going to make sure that they don't come out of the eye, that they come out of this bottom eyelid, okay? So I'm going to have just a couple. Still have them kind of interact with each other. Also, when you're drawing these, you'll notice I'm doing them pretty fast. You should be doing nice gestural strokes, okay? If I sit here and try to draw every single one, you see how like chunky and not natural they look like? You want to go fast when you're drawing eyelashes, okay? So now we have an eyebrow, an eyelash, we have shading, we've done the tear duct, we've got a lot going on, okay? The last big thing that we're going to add is the fact that since the eye is so wet and glossy, not only is it reflecting light, but it's mirroring things that are in it. Okay, when you look into someone's eyes, you can see what they're looking at, right? Because it's like a mirror; it reflects it. So what our eye is going to be reflecting are these eyelashes here, because they're going to be casting down onto the eye, similar to how the eyelid is casting the shadow down onto the eyeball. So it's going to go, let's see, I have to copy it. So this one goes up like that, so that means it's going to come down a little bit. This one comes up like that. There's one going into it. There's one right there, there, there. There's like two that kind of go whoosh, just like that. I'm just going to add some of those into it so it looks like it is reflecting them, okay? You can include more over here. Whoopsies, it's a little dark. Over here. So that way it looks like it's actually showing like reflections. And there you have it. Again, this tutorial is based off of the one that I provided the link to, your assignments week 1 through 2, okay? So if you want a more detailed and also slower, I know this video was fast because I have 2 more tutorials to get out to you guys, but if you want a longer, more detailed version of how to draw a realistic eye like this with a pencil, which is also an advantage, that link is in your assignments week 1 through 2, okay? And I believe it's just called something like how to draw a realistic eye. But to kind of compare with how fast I did this eye, her video is 50 minutes long. So there's a lot more details that you can do. Some of the details that I know she adds are some of the wrinkles under the eye, like I've done on this one. So she adds things like that. Yeah, there's just a lot more detail, but for the sake of, you know, doing this live stream tonight, this is where I'm going to end it. So hopefully this helps you with drawing an eye, and I'll talk to you in my office chats. Talk to you guys later. Bye.